Have you ever stopped to wonder why you keep replaying that one slightly awkward conversation you had 3 years ago? Or why you feel physically sick when you have to cancel plans at the last minute? Even when part of you knows the other person will be perfectly fine, the answer isn't something your brain is doing, that you have almost no control over. The real answer might surprise you more than you'd expect. So let's dig into this together. Think about the exact physical feeling of guilt. It's not just a thought floating in your head. It's a sudden, heavy drop in the bottom of your stomach. It's a flush of heat creeping up the back of your neck when you realize you said the wrong thing. It's a tightness in your chest that makes taking a deep breath feel like pulling air through a wet sponge. We talk about guilt as an emotion, but if you didn't already know, the brain processes social pain using the exact same physical hardware it uses for a broken bone or a severe burn. Your body is physically punishing you for stepping out of line, for breaking a social contract, or for letting someone down. The brain doesn't care whether the threat is real. Because we experience guilt as actual, literal pain, our entire human instinct is to avoid it at all costs. We lie about tiny, insignificant things just to avoid the sick feeling of disappointing a stranger. We stay in relationships for 5 months after we know they're completely dead just because pulling the trigger feels too incredibly heavy to bear. We spend 45 minutes agonizing over how to word a 3-sentence email so we don't sound too harsh. Guilt is the ultimate daily friction. It slows down every human interaction, making us double-guess our every move, making us compromise what we want, making us apologize when we barely even mean it. It's exhausting. Now imagine waking up tomorrow and that friction is just completely gone. Someone in a lab finally patents a chemical compound that specifically targets those exact pain circuits. It turns down the volume on social remorse without affecting your logic, your humor, or your memory. It doesn't make you angry or malicious, it just stops the brain from punishing you. When you act purely in your own personal self-interest, you swallow a small white pill with your morning coffee, and 20 minutes later, the heavy, invisible backpack you've been carrying your entire life simply evaporates into nothing. The freedom would feel completely intoxicating at first. You'd walk right into your boss's office, quit your job on the spot, and leave your team totally stranded on a massive project without feeling a single tremor in your chest. You could tell your closest friend you don't want to go to their wedding because the flight is too expensive. And when they cry on the phone, you'd just listen to them cry. You'd register their tears as a piece of data, rather than a wound you're personally responsible for. You'd hang up, go make a sandwich, and sleep for a solid 8 hours. This is the moment the world permanently shifts. Because the problem with removing the pain of guilt is that we fundamentally misunderstand what guilt actually is doing for us. We think of it as a heavy leash. We think it's a frustrating flaw in our mental programming that holds us back from getting exactly what we want, from being brutally honest, from fully optimizing our daily lives. But that leash isn't just holding you back from your maximum potential. That leash is the only thing keeping you attached to the rest of the human race. Let's talk about exactly what happens in your head 20 minutes after you take this pill. It wouldn't feel like getting high. It wouldn't feel like a sedative. If you didn't already know, the absence of pain is almost impossible for the human brain to actively notice. You would just feel incredibly, unusually clear. Think about the last time you had a fever finally break. That sudden lightness in your joints, the sudden ability to just breathe normally without thinking about it or bracing for a cough, that is exactly what it would feel like, but centered entirely in your chest. You would go about your morning routine, make your breakfast, and check your phone. You'd see 3 missed texts from a friend who is going through a terrible breakup, someone who desperately needs you to come over and just sit with them. Normally, seeing those texts triggers an immediate physical chain reaction. You look at your comfortable couch, you look at the rain outside, you really don't want to go, but you consider yourself a loyal friend. Holding those two contradictory beliefs that don't fit together, wanting to stay home, but needing to see yourself as a good person, creates a literal error signal in your brain. It feels like a buzzing, tight pressure behind your eyes. It forces you to put on your shoes, grab your coat, and go out into the cold rain, just to turn that internal buzzing off. But today, with the chemical flowing through your system, that error signal simply fails to fire. You read the texts. You understand your friend is sad. You understand they will be disappointed if you don't show up. But your chest is completely still. You put the phone down, sit on the couch, and turn on the television. There is no buzzing at all. You still have your entire moral compass completely intact. You know exactly what society considers right and wrong. You just no longer feel the physical penalty for choosing wrong. We usually think of morality as this high-level philosophical concept, but in practice, everyday morality is mostly just a physical flinch. It is the brain part that handles fear reacting, before you even have time to think, warning you that if you act selfishly, the tribe might kick you out into the cold. The pill simply cuts the wire between knowing a rule exists and caring if you break it. By day 3, you would start testing the boundaries. Everyone would. You would walk into a store, buy an expensive outfit, wear it to a party, and bring it back the next day for a full refund. When the cashier asks if there is anything wrong with it, you wouldn't do that nervous little laugh we all do when we lie. You would just look them dead in the eye and say it didn't fit. You'd walk past a coworker struggling to carry 3 heavy boxes to their car in the parking lot. Normally, you'd jog over, get your sleeves dirty, and help, driven entirely by the fear of looking like a jerk. Today, you calculate that helping them offers you 0 personal benefit and costs you 5 minutes, so you just keep walking. You don't even look down at your phone to pretend you didn't see them. You watch them struggle, feel absolutely nothing, and get into your warm car. Because your brain is no longer wasting enormous amounts of energy. Punishing you for minor social infractions, you would suddenly have an overwhelming surplus of mental stamina. You'd realize how much of your day is usually spent managing other people's perceptions of you, cushioning your words, and performing tiny acts of completely fake politeness. With that burden lifted, your efficiency would skyrocket. You would start asking for raises with absolute terrifying calm. You would cut off family members who annoy you with a single, brutal text message and then never think about it again. You are finally perfectly free from the friction of caring about how your actions land. But that absolute freedom creates a blind spot you wouldn't even notice until it was entirely too late. Think about the physical sensation of an awkward silence. You are standing in a hallway talking to a neighbor you barely know, and the conversation naturally runs out of momentum. What happens inside your body? Your chest gets a little tight. Your brain starts racing, furiously searching for a safe, completely meaningless topic like the weather or weekend plans, just to bridge the gap. You do this entirely instinctively, because walking away too abruptly triggers that tiny, sharp prick of social guilt. You don't want them to think you are rude. You don't want to be perceived as cold. Now imagine that hallway conversation when the pill has completely severed that specific fear response. Your neighbor finishes a sentence about their lawnmower. You realize you have absolutely 0 interest in lawnmowers, and you actively want to go inside and eat lunch. Normally, you would do a little laugh, slap your thigh, and say something like, "Well, I should probably let you go." You would take the blame for ending the interaction, so they don't feel dismissed. But today, the moment they stop speaking, you just turn around and unlock your door. You don't smile. You don't offer an excuse. You just terminate the exchange the exact second it stops serving your needs. The social glue was mostly just fear. When you multiply that single, tiny interaction by 8 billion people, you realize that what we call politeness is actually just a massive, incredibly complex hostage situation. We are all holding each other hostage with the threat of subtle social disapproval, and we are all constantly paying the ransom. By performing thousands of small, harmless lies every single day, we say, "We should get dinner sometime," to people we hope we never see again. We type "no worries at all" when a coworker is 45 minutes late. And we are actually furious. We use these soft, padded words as shock absorbers, so the heavy machinery of society doesn't grind itself to pieces. If you didn't already know, the moment those shock absorbers disappear, human connection becomes incredibly brief. Let's look at what happens when you run into an old friend from college at a coffee shop. Under normal circumstances, you'd spend 20 minutes performing a highly choreographed dance of mutual interest. You would ask about their job, they would ask about your family. But with the chemical removing your need to be polite, you suddenly realize you don't actually care about their job. They ask if you want to sit down and catch up. You look at them, register that this interaction will drain 30 minutes of your energy for zero emotional return, and you just say no. They ask if everything is okay. You explain calmly and clearly that you simply do not value their company enough anymore to delay your schedule. You wouldn't say it with malice. That is the most unsettling part. Anger requires you to care. You would deliver this devastating emotional blow with the exact same flat, mild tone you use to order a black coffee. By the end of the first month, you would start to notice that relationships you always believed were built on deep, unconditional love were actually just sustained by heavy, invisible obligations. Think about the physical and financial effort of visiting extended family for the holidays. The packing, the crowded airports, the tense dinners where you bite your tongue to avoid starting a massive argument. Why do we actually do it? Because the crushing guilt of staying home and disappointing your mother simply outweighs the pure exhaustion of going. But with the pill, the airports on the week of a major holiday would be completely empty. You would call your family and tell them you are spending the holiday alone because it is vastly more relaxing. When they get upset on the phone, their anger wouldn't trigger that frantic, desperate need to apologize and fix it. You would just let the silence stretch. If a relationship doesn't provide immediate, measurable joy or utility, you just drop it. There is no fading out. There is no ghosting. Because ghosting only happens when we are too guilty to face a confrontation. You just send a text stating that the friendship is no longer generating a positive return on your time. And just like that, the world becomes perfectly honest, perfectly efficient, and fundamentally cold. It is exactly midnight. You are standing barefoot on the cold kitchen tile of a house you have lived in for 7 years. The only sound is the low, steady hum of the refrigerator. Upstairs, your partner of a decade is fast asleep. On the kitchen island in front of you is a printed legal document, a transfer authorization to move your entire shared life savings into a new, private account under only your name. Beside the paper is a small glass of tap water and one small white pill. Your hand is resting on the counter, and your fingers are visibly shaking. Without the chemical in your system, the mere thought of signing that paper makes you physically nauseous. Your stomach feels like it is full of heavy, cold water. You can practically hear the confrontation that will happen tomorrow, the exact pitch of your partner's voice breaking, the devastating look of total, uncomprehending betrayal in their eyes. This is your biological emergency brake engaging. Your brain is flooding your system with stress hormones, screaming at you that if you cross this specific line, you are fundamentally breaking the human code. You desperately want to start a new life, and you know you need that money to survive the transition, but the emotional cost of taking it feels completely insurmountable. You do this on a smaller scale every time you rehearse an excuse in your head before canceling a minor commitment, preemptively trying to numb your own conscience before you take the hit. But right now, you aren't just canceling dinner. You are completely dismantling another human being's security. You look at the clock. You have 2 clear options. You can tear up the paper, walk back up the stairs, and remain quietly trapped in a life you secretly gave up on 2 years ago. Or you can take the pill. You pick it up. You place it on your tongue and swallow it down. You sit perfectly still on the wooden bar stool, and you watch the digital clock on the microwave slowly change. 12:05, 12:10, 12:18. You are waiting for the exact moment the heavy, cold water in your stomach finally drains away. You focus entirely on your own breathing. And then, right around 12:22, the shift happens. The suffocating tightness in your throat simply evaporates. The trembling in your hand completely stops. You look down at the transfer document again. 10 minutes ago, it was a terrifying, radioactive object that you could barely bring yourself to look at. Now, it is just a piece of standard printer paper with black ink on it. You pick up the pen and sign your name in a smooth, perfectly steady line. There is no rush of adrenaline, no racing heart. You fold the paper, put it in your jacket, and walk slowly up the stairs. You stand in the doorway of your bedroom and look at your partner sleeping in the dark. This is the person who has shared thousands of meals with you, the person who held you on the floor when you got the phone call that your father passed away. You search your chest for a flicker of remorse, a shadow of hesitation, but there is absolutely nothing inside you but a vast, quiet, hyper-rational emptiness. You realize, in this exact moment, that the pill is no longer just a shield against everyday social awkwardness. It is a weapon. It is a license to commit absolute, life-altering emotional violence against someone who trusts you without having to pay a single cent of the personal toll. You pack a single suitcase in the dark. You don't leave a note on the bedside table. A note is an apology, and an apology implies that you believe you did something fundamentally wrong. You no longer believe you did anything wrong. You simply reallocated resources to better serve your own future. You walk out the front door, lock it behind you, get into your car, and turn the key. You don't look back at the bedroom window. You just put the car in drive and merge onto the empty highway. By the end of the second month, the pill is no longer a secret advantage for a few individuals. It is cheap, it is widely available, and it is in the water supply of human culture. This is when the first invisible pillar holding society together quietly snaps in half. We usually assume the global economy runs on money, on contracts, on the strict enforcement of laws, but if you look closely at how the world actually functions day to day, you realize that a massive percentage of our infrastructure relies entirely on the fact that ordinary people feel physically terrible when they let other people down. Think about a busy restaurant kitchen on a Friday night. It is 100 degrees. The ticket printer is screaming with orders, and the dishwasher just walked out. Under normal circumstances, the shift manager begs the remaining staff to stay 2 hours late. They groan, they complain, but eventually, they stay. Why? Because looking your stressed manager in the eye and walking out the back door triggers a massive spike of social anxiety. You picture your coworkers drowning in dirty plates, and the heavy, buzzing guilt keeps your feet planted on the greasy tile floor. Now watch what happens when every line cook in the city has taken the pill. The manager asks them to stay. The cooks look around, calculate that time and a half is not worth the physical exhaustion, and they just take off their aprons. They do not apologize. They do not offer to come in early tomorrow. They just walk out the door, leaving the restaurant to completely paralyze and shut down. Within 3 weeks, the entire service industry begins to collapse because minimum wage was never actually enough to pay for that level of stress. We were subsidizing low wages with high levels of human guilt. Once that subsidy is gone, the damage moves rapidly up the chain to places where human lives are actually on the line. Imagine a severely understaffed nursing home. The people working there are physically exhausted, moving from room to room, changing beds, and feeding people who cannot feed themselves. It is grueling, thankless work. The only thing keeping the midnight shift running is the fact that human beings are biologically wired to feel deep, agonizing remorse if they abandon someone who is completely helpless. The human brain interprets an elderly person's distress as a direct threat to the tribe's safety, flooding the worker's system with an overwhelming urge to help. That biological wire is now permanently cut. A nurse checks her bank account, realizes she can pay rent this month, and decides she simply does not want to work a double shift. She clocks out halfway through feeding a patient, when the hospital administrator calls her phone in a total panic, screaming that people will literally suffer if she doesn't come back. She listens to his voice with absolute, chilling calm. She processes his panic as background noise. She tells him she is going to the movies and hangs up. The hospital ward goes quiet, completely unstaffed, because money alone is not enough to convince someone to do the hardest jobs on Earth. This is the moment we realize how much of human civilization is basically a massive charity project run by our own nervous systems. We are forced to be our brother's keeper because our brains physically punish us when we aren't. As millions of people simultaneously stop volunteering, stop donating, and stop doing favors that don't directly benefit them, a terrifying new cold math takes over the streets. You would see minor car accidents where the driver at fault simply drives away, calmly calculating that the chance of getting caught is lower than the cost of higher insurance premiums. The social contract is no longer enforced by an internal emotional compass. It is only enforced by security cameras and police officers. And there are nowhere near enough police officers to force 8 billion people to pretend they still care about each other. By month 6, the basic concept of a promise entirely disappears from the human vocabulary. Think about how many things in your life right now rely purely on someone's word. You leave your laptop on a coffee shop table and ask the stranger next to you to watch it while you use the restroom. You do that because you instinctively know that the stranger would feel a crushing weight of guilt if they let someone steal it on their watch. You are relying on their internal discomfort to protect your property. But in a world where that weight is permanently gone, they just watch someone take your laptop, calculate that intervening might result in a physical altercation, and calmly go back to reading their book. Trust was always just the assumption of someone else's guilt. Because you can no longer rely on that internal moral compass, society has to physically build an external replacement. You can no longer just rent an apartment with a handshake, a smile, and a decent credit score. Landlords begin demanding a deposit equal to 5 years of rent because they know you would walk away from the lease. The exact second you found a cheaper place across town and you wouldn't lose a single second of sleep over breaking the contract. Every single business transaction, from buying a house to ordering a custom piece of furniture, requires layers of digital surveillance, massive upfront collateral, and rigid legal enforcement. The world becomes incredibly slow and deeply paranoid, bogged down by the literal financial cost of replacing the human conscience with paperwork. But the most devastating shift happens quietly, behind the locked doors of your own home. Think about the sheer, exhausting physical grind of raising a young child. Waking up at 3 a.m. to soothe a crying baby isn't just driven by pure love, it is heavily driven by the biological terror of being a bad parent, the absolute agonizing guilt of letting a helpless creature suffer in the dark. Now, imagine a mother who has been taking the pill for 6 months. Her baby starts screaming in the middle of the night. She opens her eyes, looks at the ceiling, and registers the noise. She simply does the math. She calculates that she needs exactly 7 more hours of sleep to perform optimally at her job tomorrow. She knows the baby is fed, warm, and simply wants attention. Without the piercing, physical pain of maternal guilt forcing her out of bed to go rock the child, she just puts in silicone earplugs and goes back to sleep. The child cries until it is physically exhausted and falls quiet. The mother wakes up perfectly refreshed, completely unbothered by what happened. A generation of children begins to grow up in perfectly clean, perfectly scheduled homes where they are treated exactly like biological investments. They are kept alive and healthy, but they are never comforted when it is slightly inconvenient. This same cold logic bleeds into how we treat the people who raised us. In the past, families would bankrupt themselves paying for end-of-life care, driven by the heavy, invisible obligation of giving back to their aging parents. But with the chemical erasing that massive debt, adult children simply stop paying. They move their parents into state-run facilities that look more like sterile storage warehouses, and they never visit. Why would they go? A visit costs 3 hours of driving, ruins a Saturday, and offers zero measurable benefit to their own personal timeline. You would sit in your living room on a quiet afternoon, completely free of anxiety, completely free of the heavy backpack you used to carry everywhere. You don't owe anyone anything. Nobody expects anything from you. You have perfectly optimized your time, your money, and your emotional energy. But as you look at your phone, realizing that no one is going to call you just to check in, and knowing you have absolutely no desire to call anyone else, a terrifying new clarity settles over you. You sit in your quiet, perfectly clean living room on a Tuesday evening. You have no debt, no draining social obligations, and no exhausting family drama pulling at your attention. You have completely insulated yourself from every possible source of emotional friction. You look at your phone, and for the first time in your entire life, there is absolutely zero anxiety in your chest. You are totally, completely free. But as the hours stretch on, the silence in the house starts to feel different. It doesn't feel like peace anymore. It feels like a vacuum. You realize that without the constant, nagging pull of what you owe other people, you have no idea what you are actually supposed to do with yourself. So the real question isn't whether the global economy could survive without the biological thread of guilt holding it together. The real question is what happens to your actual core identity when you completely remove the emotional friction of other human beings. And that question has a much more uncomfortable answer. Think about how you define yourself right now. You probably think of yourself as a loyal friend, a reliable worker, or a caring partner. But how do you actually know that those words are true? You only know it because staying loyal, reliable, or caring often hurts. You only know you are an honest person because the act of lying makes your stomach physically turn. Your entire personality is basically just a map of the things you are willing to suffer for. When the pill takes away the suffering, it doesn't just erase the bad feelings you have about letting someone down. It completely erases the map. If you don't feel bad about leaving, are you a loyal person? If you don't feel bad about lying, are you an honest person? If you didn't already know, when neuroscientists look at the brain parts that process our self-image, they find them heavily tangled up with the exact same areas that process our social standing. The brain doesn't really have a standalone concept of you. It only has a concept of you in relation to your tribe. If you permanently cut the biological wire that makes you care about the tribe, your brain slowly loses the ability to recognize who you are. You stop having defined values. You just have passing appetites. You eat when you are hungry, you sleep when you are tired, and you interact with others only when you need a physical resource. You become a perfectly smooth object sliding through an empty room. You would look back at the years before you took the pill, remembering all those times you agonized over sending a difficult text message, or drove 2 hours in the snow just to help a friend move a heavy couch, or stayed awake staring at the ceiling because you accidentally insulted a coworker. You used to absolutely hate that feeling. You used to think that heavy, sick feeling in your chest was a flaw in your biology, a cage keeping you from finding true, independent peace. You thought the goal of life was to finally put that heavy backpack down. But sitting in your perfectly optimized life, where nobody expects anything from you and you expect absolutely nothing from them, you would finally understand the trade you made. The pain of guilt was the exact same thing as the gravity of love. You cannot weigh absolutely nothing and still expect to stay anchored to the earth. We spend our entire human experience desperately trying to cut the invisible strings that tie us to other people's expectations, totally unaware that those stressful, heavy strings were the only things holding us upright. The heaviest thing you carry is the only thing keeping you from floating away into the dark. This is a hypothetical scenario. Real outcomes would depend on factors no model can predict.